The council chamber stretched endlessly, a cathedral of interstellar authority suspended in the cold void above a neutral planet. Light from the distant sun fractured through the crystalline hull, casting prismatic shards across the polished, obsidian floor. Delegates from a dozen species occupied towering chairs, each more alien and intimidating than the last. Limbs too many, eyes too numerous, bodies exuding an aura of dominance that humans instinctively recognized as a threat. Their presence was ceremonial but charged with unspoken power. The sheer scale of their forms made the human delegation seem like children sitting in a hall of giants. At the center, a polished dais awaited, where Adrian Cole and the human representatives were to speak. Adrian sat forward in his chair, barely tall enough to reach the seat's armrest, fingers clenched tightly on his datapad. His young face betrayed his nerves, eyes flicking between the unreadable alien faces and the official protocol screens. Behind him, the human delegates shifted uneasily, aware of their physical and political vulnerability. Every subtle movement of the aliens, the twitch of a mandible, the rise of a tentacle, the glow of an ocular cluster, communicated authority and threat. Adrian's mind raced, cataloging each species, their known treaties, and past offenses. Yet externally, he maintained a calm veneer, a mask honed from years of study. The chamber seemed to hum, a low resonance vibrating through the floor, walls, and spine. It was more than a room. It was a test, a crucible designed to crush those who lacked control, and Adrian felt the weight of humanity's survival pressing down upon him, grounding his fear into a sharp, focused resolve. The formal opening of the peace talks began with an accusatory salvo from the Alien Council, their voices layered in alien tonalities that reverberated unnaturally in the chamber. They accused humanity of violating intergalactic treaties, citing intercepted communications, border incursions, and alleged weapon development. The human delegation stiffened, the sheer volume of the charges threatening to collapse their composure. Adrian, seated at the front as translator, felt a surge of panic mixed with exhilaration. This was his moment, one where precision and cunning could reshape perception. He accessed the translation protocol, his fingers moving almost automatically, filtering the harsh alien condemnations through a linguistic lens honed for subtle manipulation. The official apology mandated by protocol passed his lips, but his mind reframed it. Each word was carefully chosen, a minor statement of submission reshaped into a calculated assertion of dignity. A phrase intended to show human weakness was rendered instead as quiet defiance. Conciliatory tones were laced with latent challenge. In the council's eyes, the humans had gone from docile to unexpectedly resolute. Murmurs erupted among the delegates. Tentacles twitched, ocular clusters dilated. Some leaned forward, intrigued. Within the human delegation, confusion rippled. Some suspected Adrian had acted recklessly, yet his eyes were calm, a mask of focus, betraying none of the storm within. Every syllable carried the weight of humanity's reputation, every inflection a silent gamble. Adrian's manipulation of translation was more than diplomacy. It was an assertion that humans, though physically weak and politically cornered, were not easily crushed, a subtle announcement that their cunning could rival even the most powerful species present. Beneath the surface of calculated diplomacy, Adrian's thoughts drifted to Eli, his younger brother, abducted years earlier during a raid by a notorious alien faction. Eli's absence was an ache embedded in Adrian's chest, a wound that pulsed with both grief and rage. Every carefully curated word spoken to the council was infused with personal stakes. This was not only about human survival, but also about proving worth, about ensuring no other families suffered the helplessness he endured. His mind replayed the helpless image of Eli being dragged away, the metallic clank of restraints, the alien voices mocking the frailty of human children. It was a memory that sharpened his instincts, transformed anxiety into quiet cunning. When the council reacted with unexpected attention, leaning forward, exchanging cautious glances, acknowledging the subtle strength in his words, Adrian felt a fleeting, hollow victory. The human delegates, oblivious to the internal motives guiding his translation, sensed only a hint of danger, unsure whether he had sabotaged or saved them. The moral ambiguity of his choice weighed lightly over him. Diplomacy and subterfuge were inseparable in this environment. Humanity's vulnerability was stark, contrasted with Adrian's precise manipulation, a single translator bending perception, turning apparent weakness into subtle defiance. Each heartbeat was a negotiation, each thought a concealed weapon. The dramatic tension was palpable. Adrian's personal vendetta and professional skill collided, setting a precedent for how far he might go to protect his species, or perhaps exact vengeance. In this moment, the seeds of intrigue, moral complexity, and looming betrayal were planted, signaling that the council chamber was less a site of peaceful discourse than the opening gambit of a high-stakes human-alien chess game. Adrian Cole's brilliance had always been both a gift and a curse. From an early age, he absorbed languages like water into sand, mastering complex phonemes and cultural nuances that baffled even veteran linguists. Yet, this intellectual prowess was inseparable from loneliness. His parents, both diplomats, were distant, engaged in interstellar negotiations, or incapacitated by political intrigue, leaving Adrian to navigate the treacherous currents of moral ambiguity alone. The true fracture in his psyche came with Eli's disappearance, a sudden, brutal abduction by a raiding alien faction when Adrian was just 14. He remembered the metallic clang of restraints, the frenzied shouts of soldiers, and Eli's small, frightened hands reaching for him. That memory became a silent, constant companion, fueling both guilt and determination. Adrian's prodigious mind transformed grief into meticulous planning, an instinct to anticipate alien motives before they even manifested. He carried Eli's absence as a quiet, unyielding ache, a lens through which every decision was filtered. Survival for humanity and retribution for his brother intertwined in his conscience, blurring lines between moral rightness and strategic necessity. This duality, the boy who could speak in tongues and the young man who harbored vengeance, defined him. While his outward demeanor projected calm precision, internally, Adrian was a storm, grief, intellect, and ethical uncertainty circling in constant tension, shaping the very core of his approach to diplomacy. Every phrase he prepared for the council, every gesture, carried the weight of Eli's loss and humanity's fragile existence. Within this high-stakes arena, Adrian was not alone. Laura Hayes, the human delegation's lead, exuded pragmatism and cautious authority. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, betrayed a skepticism she rarely voiced, especially toward Adrian's unpredictable brilliance. She had seen young prodigies falter when ambition overshadowed judgment, and though she outwardly tolerated his methods, she monitored every nuance, weighing risk against necessity. To her, the human delegation was fragile, dependent not on brute strength but on strategy, guile, and the delicate interplay of diplomacy. Zarvo, the alien ambassador representing the Voral expanse, embodied pride and measured menace. Towering and resplendent, Zarvo's multi-limbed presence was both awe-inspiring and subtly intimidating. He underestimated humans, assuming their physical weakness mirrored intellectual predictability, a miscalculation Adrian quietly intended to exploit. Meanwhile, Adrian's internal world was anchored by Eli's memory, rendered in letters, flashbacks, and holographic images preserved by their family. He studied these fragments obsessively, deriving emotional clarity and tactical insight from them. In private preparation, Adrian immersed himself in alien linguistic subtleties, cultural signals, and unspoken hierarchies. Every inflection, pause, and idiomatic nuance was analyzed, calibrated, and stored. Each study session was a delicate dance between technical mastery and emotional grounding, ensuring that when Adrian spoke, he conveyed exactly what he intended, or, more importantly, what the aliens would interpret according to his design. In these moments, the story of humanity, fraught with vulnerability and hope, rested on one young translator's shoulders. As the council session loomed, Adrian wrestled with a question that gnawed at his conscience. Was deception justified if it safeguarded millions of lives? Every subtle alteration of translation, every calculated inflection, was a moral compromise. Yet, in a universe where physical might dictated respect, honesty often equaled annihilation for humans. The stakes were painfully clear. Failure could provoke embargoes, military retaliation, or even eradication. Adrian's mind alternated between empathy and pragmatism, weighing consequences with ruthless precision. Humanity's weakness was glaring. They lacked overwhelming firepower and diplomatic sway. And yet, Adrian saw a pathway to survive, even thrive, by bending perception rather than brute force. In these private hours, he replayed past scenarios, cross-referencing alien reactions with known psychological tendencies, searching for leverage points. He questioned the ethical price of manipulation. Was it murder of integrity, or a shield forged to preserve life? These internal debates contrasted sharply with Laura's pragmatic reminders and Zarvo's unintentional underestimations, creating a crucible where intellect and morality collided. The audience gains a clear window into Adrian's psyche, the tension between cunning and conscience, personal vendetta and collective responsibility. Every decision, every word, every pause was weighted with potential consequence. By situating Adrian's brilliance against both his emotional scars and humanity's precarious position, the narrative makes the stakes visceral. The reader understands that this is more than a political negotiation. It is a moral and existential crucible, one in which the fate of billions and the redemption of a lost brother are intertwined. The council chamber thrummed with tension as the first full debate commenced. Alien delegates, each a testament to interstellar power and pride, presented terms for humanity that were unflinching in their severity. Trade embargoes, resource limitations, and quasi-militarized restrictions were laid out in a chorus of alien tonalities, each word reverberating unnaturally through the chamber's crystalline walls. Human delegates flinched visibly, some gripping armrests or exchanging anxious glances. Whispers rippled among them, fear, doubt, and the instinctive recognition of their species' vulnerability. Adrian sat at the front, a translator on the surface, but a strategist beneath, processing every syllable with laser focus. He scanned the alien faces, noting subtle shifts in posture, ocular dilation, and limb microgestures, indicators of pride, irritation, or curiosity. In this moment, humanity's weakness was apparent, yet the young linguist recognized the first cracks in alien arrogance. Each term delivered by the council was not just a rule, but a psychological probe, testing for submission. Around him, humans wavered, threatened by both the content and the intensity of the proceedings. The stakes were immediately personal. Failure here could spiral into annihilation or subjugation. Adrian's mind was already calculating, weighing not only the literal translation of alien speech, but the potential impact of subtle linguistic reinterpretation. He knew that the path forward required more than passivity. The survival of billions depended on the courage to act in ways that might redefine both perception and power. As the alien emissaries droned on, a pivotal moment arrived, a statement meant to frame humanity as weak and compliant. Adrian's fingers hovered over his datapad, a quiet tremor betraying the tension coiling within him. The literal translation, "We acknowledge our weaknesses," would have cemented human submission, eliciting satisfaction from the council. Instead, he made a calculated choice, subtle alteration, the difference between weakness and understated defiance. The words left his lips as, "We are stronger than you anticipate." The chamber's atmosphere shifted instantly. Some delegates chuckled, underestimating the statement as bravado. Others stiffened, their pride pricked by what they perceived as audacious confidence. Murmurs spread through the room, a ripple of uncertainty and intrigue. Within the human delegation, a young aide's eyes widened, suspicion clouding admiration. Adrian caught the glance, understanding the seeds of doubt he had just sown among his own ranks. Yet even as moral alarms sounded in his mind, a vision of Eli flashed across his consciousness. The boy's frightened gaze, the metal restraints, the sudden absence. That memory reinforced the necessity of risk, of bending truth to protect humanity. This act, small in words but monumental in implication, marked Adrian's first deliberate step into manipulation on a global stage. The line between diplomacy and deception blurred instantly. He was no longer a passive observer translating words. He had become an active player in a perilous interstellar game, one where perception could outweigh power, and the survival of his species rested on his cunning. The repercussions of Adrian's choice unfolded with rapid, unpredictable force. Alien delegates reacted variably, some intrigued, eyes narrowing as if re-evaluating their assumptions. Others bristled, their appendages twitching in irritation or derision. The council's careful choreography fractured slightly, the controlled rhythm of debate giving way to tension-laden improvisation. Among humans, whispers of suspicion grew. The aide who had noticed Adrian's deviation questioned whether the young translator had overstepped, possibly endangering them all. Adrian felt the weight of personal responsibility keenly, his conscience tugging even as strategic calculations demanded calm. The memory of Eli, again vivid and visceral, reinforced a dual sense of moral duty and vengeance. The line between personal vendetta and collective survival blurred into a singular focus. Beyond the visible council chamber, subtle movements hinted at unseen consequences. A faction of alien delegates, perceptive and calculating, detected the shift in human posture and tone, interpreting it as subterfuge. Quietly, they began plotting countermeasures, introducing a layer of hidden danger that escalated the stakes beyond diplomacy into covert conflict. Adrian, aware of these ripples yet unyielding, acknowledged the danger but pressed forward. Deception had become a necessary tool, and the moment of passive translation had passed. By the session's close, he was no longer simply a linguist. He was a strategist, morally ambivalent but resolute, fully committed to a high-risk plan with consequences that could either redefine humanity's place among the stars or hasten its destruction. The council chamber, once a space of ceremony, had transformed into a crucible, and Adrian had chosen to step into the fire. The aftermath of Adrian's first deliberate manipulation sent ripples through the human delegation, fracturing the fragile unity that had been painstakingly maintained. Laura Hayes, the delegation lead, pulled him aside in a quiet alcove, her expression a mixture of frustration and concern. "Adrian, do you understand what you've done?" she demanded, voice low but edged with sharpness. "You've taken liberties with the translation. You've gambled with the lives of every human here." Her tone carried the weight of responsibility she bore for the delegation, but also a personal mistrust, a skepticism that had been simmering since the first session. Adrian, fingers tight on the edge of the console, felt the familiar pang of guilt, a mental echo of Eli's absence. Yet, beneath the surface, he recognized the opportunity his choice had created. Every minor ripple of uncertainty among the aliens could be leveraged. Every misinterpreted inflection became a tactical advantage. "I'm aware of the risk," he replied evenly, eyes meeting hers with a steadiness he did not fully feel. Laura's frown deepened. She wanted control, structure, and transparency, while Adrian operated in moral gray zones. Their clash highlighted the growing divide within the human ranks. Some admired his audacity, sensing the seeds of leverage, while others feared the dangerous unpredictability he represented. This tension forced Adrian into a dual role, maintaining the delegation's fragile cohesion while navigating the treacherous currents of alien perception, knowing that any misstep could trigger diplomatic collapse or worse. The council's chamber was no longer merely a stage for negotiation. It had become a pressure cooker for internal conflict as well as interstellar intrigue. Even as he faced scrutiny from humans, the aliens were quietly probing for signs of deception. A minor diplomat, thin-limbed and sharp-eyed, lingered near Adrian's translation console during a break, an almost imperceptible glint of suspicion in multiple ocular clusters. "Curious choice of phrasing," it said, voice modulated to carry subtle warning. "Are your words truly yours?" The threat was veiled, yet unmistakable, hinting at consequences both political and personal if tampering were discovered. Adrian's stomach tightened, the familiar knot of anxiety tempered only by his calculated composure. Behind the veneer of strategy, guilt churned, a conflict amplified when a covert message flickered across his private console. Intelligence suggested that Eli might still be alive, somewhere within alien-controlled sectors. The news was both hopeful and dangerous, intensifying the moral calculus he faced. Each altered translation now carried layers of responsibility: the welfare of billions, the trust of his delegation, and the potential to locate his lost brother. He questioned himself repeatedly. Was this deception ethically defensible or merely expedient? The Council was testing humanity's reactions, probing for consistency, and Adrian's manipulations became an intricate psychological chess match. He learned to anticipate not only the overt responses, but also the unspoken calculations of every alien faction, balancing fear, curiosity, and pride against the needs of his people. The constant mental strain blurred the lines between survival, morality, and personal obsession, leaving him isolated even in a room full of observers. Adrian's isolation deepened as trust fractured on multiple fronts. Within the human delegation, murmurs questioned whether his cunning was a gift or a liability. The same whispered admiration that fueled confidence also fanned fear. Meanwhile, his relationship with Zarvo, the powerful alien ambassador, evolved into a dangerous intimacy. Adrian recognized the value of subtle trust, allowing Zarvo glimpses of cooperation while maintaining a mental barrier, masking every doubt and every hidden agenda. Their conversations became a careful dance, a psychological interplay in which Adrian gained insight into alien hierarchies, cultural assumptions, and potential weaknesses. Yet beneath the surface, he mistrusted every gesture, every smile, knowing that one misstep could expose his deception and imperil humanity. Alien factions began actively testing humanity based on his altered translations, designing scenarios to observe human compliance, reaction, and strategy. Every response from the delegation, hesitant or bold, was scrutinized, magnifying the consequences of Adrian's choices. Despite the mounting tension, he felt a paradoxical empowerment. The knowledge that human vulnerability could be reframed as leverage, that cunning and perception could offset physical weakness. He stood on a precarious edge, morally ambivalent but strategically potent, fully aware that the next few moves could determine survival or disaster. In this crucible of fear, mistrust, and opportunity, Adrian's internal conflict and external influence intertwined, establishing him as both the linchpin of humanity's defense and the architect of its uncertain fate. The stage was set for betrayal, strategy, and high-stakes maneuvering that would define the Council's outcome and Adrian's own conscience. The Council chamber, already thick with tension, seemed to vibrate with anticipation as Adrian's datapad flickered a private alert. Eli was alive. A covert intelligence network had intercepted signals from a remote alien outpost, confirming the boy's presence among prisoners previously thought lost. The revelation hit Adrian like a physical blow, twisting grief into hope and fueling a fierce resolve. The realization reframed every previous decision. The Council's so-called peace talks were a facade, a meticulously orchestrated trap designed to test human obedience and exploit perceived weakness. Each subtle deception Adrian had enacted, each altered translation, each carefully calibrated pause, suddenly carried exponentially higher stakes. The human delegation, unaware of the true peril lurking behind the alien masks, continued to tread cautiously, debating terms and concessions. Adrian, however, now carried the full weight of knowledge. Failure to manipulate perception could result not only in humanity's subjugation or annihilation, but in Eli's continued captivity, perhaps permanent loss. His mind raced, calculating leverage points, psychological pressure, and alien tendencies. In that moment, hope and dread intertwined. Adrian's internal narrative shifted from abstract strategy to intensely personal stakes. Every word he would speak, every phrase he would translate, was no longer merely diplomacy. It was a lifeline extended across interstellar space to a brother he had loved, lost, and refused to forget. The Council chamber, with its towering alien figures and human delegates poised between fear and awe, transformed into a crucible where Adrian's intellect, courage, and conscience would collide in an unprecedented gambit. When the final debate commenced, Adrian's composure masked the storm inside. The aliens delivered a critical ultimatum, intending to frame humanity's weakness as subservience, a prelude to coercion or attack. Adrian's fingers hovered over his translation console, heart hammering. Then, with deliberate precision, he altered the statement. Instead of weakness, humanity was projected as a force capable of overwhelming retaliation. The chamber erupted immediately. Tentacles waved aggressively, ocular clusters flared, and alien voices layered into chaotic argumentation, disputing the interpretation. Some delegates accused one another of misunderstanding. Others demanded clarification, their pride wounded by the suggestion that humans could be underestimated at their peril. Laura's eyes widened with horror as she realized the magnitude of Adrian's gamble. If discovered, his manipulation could trigger instantaneous hostility, perhaps military retaliation or total annihilation. Yet she also glimpsed the method behind the madness, understanding that Adrian was using alien assumptions and overconfidence against them, creating a psychological lever humanity might exploit. Within the council's cacophony, Adrian remained unervingly calm, his mind choreographing every reaction, every counter, every pause. The chamber's chaotic energy mirrored the internal tension he felt, the collision of ethical compromise, strategic brilliance, and desperate hope. This confrontation, designed as a formality, had escalated into a crucible where every syllable, every translation, was a potentially decisive move in the life-and-death game of survival, both for humanity and for Eli. Adrian's gamble teetered on a knife's edge. Every alien gesture, an imperceptible twitch of a limb, a narrowing of an eye, carried potential danger. His career, reputation, and life were now fully exposed to risk. Human delegates murmured in quiet panic, some wishing to reign in his audacity, others mesmerized by the ingenuity of his manipulation. Deep inside, Adrian wrestled with moral ambiguity. Lying on a global stage, he acknowledged, was not virtuous, yet it was necessary. The stakes were intensely personal. Eli's safety and humanity's survival rested entirely upon the credibility of his deception. As arguments flared around him, he allowed himself a brief mental image of Eli, hands bound, eyes wide but unbroken, fueling the courage he needed to remain unwavering. In that instant, all previous guilt, hesitation, and ethical concern crystallized into clarity. Truth alone would lead to failure. Perception, carefully controlled, was the only path to life. The council's chamber became both a battlefield and a proving ground, where intellect and daring supplanted physical might. By manipulating interpretation, Adrian turned perceived vulnerability into tactical leverage, exploiting alien pride and preconceptions. As the debate reached its zenith, the audience, human and alien alike, witnessed a dangerous brilliance, a young linguist risking everything in a high-stakes gamble. Adrian's choice redefined morality, loyalty, and courage in real time, merging personal vengeance, strategic genius, and ethical compromise into a singular, decisive act. Humanity's fate and Eli's freedom now rested in the balance, tethered to the audacity of one boy's mind against the weight of the galaxy's council. The council chamber, once a crucible of tension, slowly shifted under Adrian's calculated manipulations. Alien delegates, still seething from perceived audacity, found themselves cornered by the very assumptions they had relied upon, assumptions of human weakness. Adrian's careful orchestration of translation, his subtle exploitation of alien pride and expectation, created a narrative the council could not easily refute. Tentacles retracted slightly, ocular clusters dimmed in grudging acknowledgement, and voices that had been sharp with accusation softened into cautious negotiation. Humanity, once precariously positioned, now claimed a place of strategic advantage. Trade concessions, territorial recognition, and formal acknowledgement of sovereignty were granted, not through force, but through perception. Every phrase Adrian had carefully chosen amplified human strength in the eyes of alien observers, turning vulnerability into leverage. The human delegation exhaled collectively, a quiet wave of relief rippling through the ranks. Delegates who had earlier doubted Adrian's judgment now glimpsed the brilliance of his gamble. Yet amid the procedural victory, Adrian's mind remained tethered to a more personal concern, Eli. The triumph was hollow until the boy's fate was secured, and the stakes that had driven every moral compromise were not fully resolved until that confirmation arrived. In this moment, strategy and conscience, intellect and emotion, coalesced into a tangible outcome: humanity's survival, a testament to cunning, courage, and audacious foresight. The chamber, once suffocating with tension, now hummed with an uneasy, hard-won respect. News came through Adrian's private channel like a pulse of life. Eli had been freed. The outpost, dismantled under the subtle pressures created by Adrian's manipulations, had released the boy into safe custody. Relief surged through Adrian, mingled with a deep, quiet catharsis. He had carried guilt for years, the failure to protect his brother, the shadow of every lost opportunity. And now, the weight of that grief lightened. The personal victory mirrored the diplomatic one, intertwining strategy with humanity's most intimate stakes. Laura Hayes approached him afterward, her expression a mixture of lingering skepticism and newfound respect. "You risked everything," she said softly, her tone both admonishing and approving. "But it worked." Adrian acknowledged her glance, understanding that moral compromise, careful, necessary, and deliberate, had been essential to their survival. They spoke in quiet tones, reconciling the tension that had fractured the delegation earlier. In her measured pragmatism, Laura now recognized that Adrian's choices, though morally ambiguous, had saved not only billions of lives, but also the soul of their mission. The moment became more than a professional vindication. It became a personal reconciliation. Adrian's cunning, once a source of internal conflict and external doubt, was now recognized as the lifeline of human resilience. Together, they surveyed the delegation and the chamber, the tension dissipating into a cautious, calculated respect, a fragile peace wrought from daring intellect and moral courage. With the alien council retreating and favorable terms secured, humanity's status in the interstellar hierarchy shifted dramatically. Once viewed as weak and expendable, humans were now acknowledged as capable of subtle strategy, of outmaneuvering even the most powerful delegates without raising a single weapon. Adrian, still processing the blend of relief and residual guilt, felt a profound sense of empowerment. His transformation, from guilt-ridden manipulator to a savior wielding intellect as a shield, was complete. Delegates approached with renewed caution, aware that underestimating humanity could result in unforeseen consequences. Adrian's personal journey mirrored this political ascent. He had navigated fear, ethical ambiguity, and internal doubt to achieve victory both for his species and for his brother. Eli, once a symbol of loss, now represented hope, closure, and a tangible reward for calculated risk. The human delegation, too, underwent subtle transformation, acknowledging that survival sometimes required moral compromise and trust in audacious judgment. Even Laura, the pragmatic skeptic, now extended measured trust, recognizing that Adrian's brilliance had carried humanity through perilous waters. The chamber's atmosphere, once dominated by threat and suspicion, softened into cautious respect and acknowledgement. Adrian allowed himself a rare moment of quiet triumph. The convergence of intellect, courage, and emotional resilience had saved billions and reunited family. In this resolution, the narrative tension dissipates, leaving the audience with a resonant emotional and strategic closure. Humanity had not only survived but emerged empowered, and Adrian, at last, stood as both the architect and guardian of that survival. The corridors of the human outpost were hushed, lit by the gentle hum of life support systems and distant starshine filtering through reinforced glass. Adrian moved slowly, each step deliberate, as though the weight of recent events pressed against his chest. Eli sat alone in a small chamber, a mixture of relief and wariness etched across his youthful face. He had changed, subtle scars of captivity, a cautious edge in his movements, but the core of the boy remained intact. Adrian paused at the doorway, letting the moment stretch. Neither spoke at first. Words felt inadequate. Instead, Adrian approached and simply sat beside Eli, their shoulders brushing lightly. In that silence, years of fear, guilt, and longing coalesced, forming an unspoken bridge between past trauma and present safety. A glance, a slight nod, communicated understanding. The loss, the waiting, the pain, they had survived. For Adrian, this reunion was both victory and reminder, a tangible manifestation of the gamble he had taken. Eli's presence reaffirmed the necessity of risk, validating every morally ambiguous choice made in the council chamber. Yet, even in the warmth of reunion, Adrian felt the lingering echo of responsibility. What could have gone wrong? What was narrowly avoided? And what sacrifices remained invisible? The silence was a testament to endurance, a quiet acknowledgement that the cost of survival is never entirely erased. Here, at the edge of triumph, Adrian and Eli shared a fragile, wordless reconciliation, a moment that balanced hope against the shadows of past loss. Even as relief coursed through him, Adrian could not fully abandon the weight of his choices. The council's chambers, now empty and echoing with the memory of heated debates, symbolized the precariousness of victory. Every concession, every perception of human strength had been carefully orchestrated, but it had come at the price of moral compromise. The manipulations, though necessary, left invisible scars, threads of guilt woven into the fabric of his conscience. Adrian walked the silent halls, fingers tracing console edges, recalling the flares of alien pride, the micro-gestures of doubt, and the near-catastrophic risk of discovery. He knew that no one outside the chamber could fully grasp the tightrope he had walked. The victory for humanity was real, but the personal cost, the sleepless nights, the ethical negotiations with himself, the constant calculation of danger, remained private. Adrian's reflection was sober. Even as he savored humanity's survival, he acknowledged the permanence of the shadows he carried. Each decision to bend truth had been a necessity, yet it left him slightly altered, tempered by both triumph and moral compromise. In these quiet moments, Adrian realized that true leadership and survival required not only courage but a willingness to bear the unseen weight of consequence. The audience senses that his genius and daring had saved billions, yet at an emotional price, leaving an undercurrent of realism. Heroism is never without cost, and cleverness, though victorious, leaves a permanent mark on conscience. Adrian returned to the council chamber one last time, empty now except for the lingering echoes of alien voices and human murmurs. He stood at the center, alone, contemplating the vastness of space and the fragile thread on which humanity's survival had balanced. The chamber was a monument to both threat and triumph, a reminder that cleverness and courage had rewritten the galaxy's perception of humanity. A final message, typed in his private diary interface, appeared on the screen. Sometimes, to save the truth, you must lie. The words resonated with layered meaning, truth of survival, moral compromise, and personal redemption intertwined. Adrian allowed himself a quiet exhale, the tension of weeks compressed into a single, reflective moment. Beyond the immediate victory, he acknowledged lingering complexity. The council may retreat, humans may be respected, and Eli may be safe. But the cost, the scars, and the constant balancing of ethics against necessity would remain. For the audience, this was both closure and contemplation, a triumph achieved, yet not without shadow. Adrian's gaze drifted to the distant stars visible through the chamber's glass, a silent vow echoing in thought. Humanity had survived. He had fulfilled his personal mission, but vigilance, cunning, and moral awareness would always be required. In this final emotional beat, the story closes on both victory and introspection, leaving viewers with catharsis, moral resonance, and an understanding that heroism often carries the weight of private sacrifice. The lingering moral ambiguity elevates the resolution, giving the narrative depth and realism beyond simple triumph.